Hi, welcome to Yoga Selection. My name is Rod. Today's class we're focusing on balance, yoga poses that will help to improve your sense of balance. Yoga poses will also help to build some overall body strength. With your equipment, make sure that you've got 2 blocks. We'll also be using a belt, a blanket at the end for your Shavasana. We'll briefly be using the wall, so make sure that you've got a clear wall space near your mat. And just in terms of yoga mat, I've purposefully today got a thinner mat than I might other times use, and if you have that option it would be good. Important that you can feel the firmness of the floor through your yoga mat with your feet. If you've got one of those thicker, more squishy yoga mats, some of these poses are going to be a little bit more challenging. Let's start in Uttanasana. And Uttanasana, generally when we're practicing the pose, it's a relatively naturally stable, balanced pose. It's not one that we commonly topple out of. We've got our feet in this particular version of the pose hip width. I've brought my hands to the floor. If you don't easily reach the floor, you can have your hands to your shins. And so in terms of assessing the pose, this particular pose for balance, something that's really important first of all is that we get the head position sorted. So if we're lifting the head, that can tend to throw our hips back. So to bear in mind that the head is quite a heavy region of the body, and its position does tend to affect the other regions of the body. So let's first of all just relax the neck and let the head hang and be still, and feel how the body just quite naturally adjusts its balance to the more relaxed position of the head. Neck relaxed, the head hangs down, the back of the skull releasing, and we can get a little bit more of a sense of where our hips are in the pose. In most of the poses that we're working with today, that will be our real focus, the position of the hips, the position of the pelvis. And probably just a natural tendency when we're in the pose is for our hips to lean back, particularly if we're just letting our legs be a little bit limp. And just feel it if we just let the kneecaps drop and just try to relax a bit. The hips will sway, lean back a little towards the wall behind, but it does so at the expense of that feeling of dropping onto the legs, of the body weight compressing the legs. And so another way that we're often adjusting and optimizing the balance of a yoga pose is in terms of its weight distribution on the floor. So the soles of the feet obviously very important when we're assessing balance. I can feel very clearly that my weight is imbalanced, and an imbalanced weight too much towards the heels, so I let my weight come more forwards. I can feel the body weight spread more evenly between my heels, the balls of the feet. Hips are more or less over the ankles. I've still got my head relaxed. So I mentioned that it's often not a pose that we tend to lose balance in or topple out of, fall out of. However, a couple of things that we can do just to heighten the sense of balance in the pose. First one is really fundamental to balance, not just when we're practicing yoga, but outside of yoga. Of course, it's really crucial to a lot of difficult balancing poses, is our eyes. We need to make sure that our eyes are open to balance more easily and still, so that we can focus our gaze on one point, and that helps the overall balance of the body to be more clear and stable. So let's now shut our eyes, just feel the effect of doing that in Uttanasana. And because we've got our hands to the floor, some of you, or to the shins, that is also just propping your balance up. So if we just fold the arms now, have the arms folded at the elbows, letting the head hang with the eyes shut, you might just feel there's a little bit more instability in the pose. The pose can cope with that, but notice if the hips are moving about a lot, that's when the difficulty comes. Let's just reassess that. Let's briefly come up, just standing. Standing, looking forwards, you've got your feet as they are. The more we keep our hips stable in this upright Tadasana position, the better the overall balance of the body. So we've had our feet there more or less hip width. Some of you might have been just a little bit wider than that, but let's go as wide as we can on the yoga mat, as wide as the yoga mat will allow. And we tend to find that with the feet wider, with the arms further out from the body, our balance gets a little more stable. So just testing that theory. So with the feet now wider, come back to the pose, neck relax, eyes shut, arms folded, And we can feel there's an overall improved sense of stability in the body, and there's much more stability in the hips. So the head is just naturally still. We relax it, gravity helps to keep it still. The hips, the higher region of the body, and we feel just a little more stable, more fixed in space, more calm even in their quality than it was with the feet a little narrow. But let's test it again. If we come up and bring the feet all the way together, big toes, inner heels touching. And the prediction here is that with the feet together, the pose is going to feel a little more complex in terms of how we maintain our balance. So let's now test that theory, coming forwards and feeling for yourself. Just take your time to get there. First with the hands supporting the balance. Check the weight distribution, even between the back of the foot, the heel, the front of the foot. We can refine that still further, the inner foot and the outer foot. Often when we lose the balance, it tends to follow quite a sudden shift in the sole of the foot. Often it's the weight, the foot over pronating, rolling towards the inner side, that can be associated with loss of balance. So just spreading the weight evenly over the feet, neck relaxed, eyes shut, arms folded. And as for me, really clear, I've actually got more of a noticeable wobble that I'm saving. It feels a lot more along the lines of balancing on my head in a headstand. And notice also, it's not just that first lead towards the imbalance, it's often the more aggressive overcorrection that tends to actually topple us from the pose. So we're subtly making adjustments with the soles of the feet, big toe bases, inner, outer heels, little toe bases. The hips will move about more. Notice they don't just fall forwards or backwards or to the right, to the left. It's often associated with a twisting movement, and that sensation of losing the balance often does have a little bit of a spiral-like quality to it. So just watching for that. Keeping the hips still helps the overall quality of the balance. Let's come up now. Downward facing dog pose. Again, a pose that we're commonly fairly comfortable in, quite stable in. If though we bring our hands closer together and our feet closer together, we're going to make much more of a complex balance from the pose. So let's try that. We'll start just with our regular dog pose, hands shoulder width, feet shoulder width. And let's first of all bring the hands together. So we'll bring the left hand, then the right hand right into the middle of the mat. Squash the thumbs against the index fingers, get the hands in as close as they can possibly be. We want the head to then hang through the arms, so you might just need to briefly bend your elbows so that the head can fit through. And just with the hands closer together, there is that little bit more of a sense of swaying in the pelvis. And then we can bring the feet together so that the big toes, inner heels touch. Notice that there is instability throughout the body. The pose can cope with that, but too much instability in the hip region, and that's often the tipping point where we might actually lose balance completely, fall completely out of the pose. Try it again here. If you shut your eyes and notice your hands are continually refining the balance. So it's not just the hands, it's all of the muscle groups, even the skin, all the overall total sensation of the body that is contributing to the balance. It's hard for us to really articulate that. It's quite an intuitive concept, maintaining the balance. And we need to go with that, not fight against it. It's not that we can think, okay, index finger bases pressing down is going to hold the balance. We're continually making subtle adjustments. We need to be listening to the body, and it's quite an intuitive way of working with the body. All right, let's now release down and out of the pose of Uttanasana. Forwards for a moment, hips back to heels, forward release down. Okay, so we'll go from Ardha Mukha Svanasana to another balancing pose, a pose where we're balancing on our hand, Vashisthasana. And maybe just before we get to that stage, let's just come back to Tadasana. So Tadasana is such a good pose for establishing balance and the concept of balance. And a lot of the concepts that apply to Tadasana apply to many of the other poses where we're needing to maintain our balance. And so the next pose where we're headed, of course we're balancing on our hands, so one hand at a time, but you'll probably find that when you're in the pose, a lot of the control in terms of the balance comes not so much from the hand, but from the feet. And feel it here, just those continual shifts that we work with in Tadasana, from the big toe base to the little toe base, from the inner heel to the outer heel, from the front of the foot to the back of the foot. And that's something we learn when we very first start yoga, to keep the four corners of our feet open and evenly pressing down, and how that really helps to stabilize the remainder of the body. So that foot action, the four corners of the feet projecting out and down away from the legs, it works here in Tadasana. It's also going to be very helpful when we work with Vashisthasana. Let's head there now. So we place our hands down just in their regular dog pose position, and we step back to dog pose with our feet. So we've got our hands initially shoulder width and nice and stable with our feet a little bit wider than hip width. Feet are also shoulder width. Try to align your hands and your feet symmetrically with the yoga mat, so that you're not closer to one side or the other side, so that each hand and each foot is equal distance away from the potentially imaginary center line in the mat. Some people actually have that line on their yoga mats, but if you don't, then it's more of an imaginary concept. But let's use it as we now bring the right hand into the center of the mat. Now, important here that the left fingertips are just catching your balance here. They're a little bit off to the side. I've got mine just off the mat there, and I'm going to keep the fingertips there to the floor so that that controls my balance as I turn onto the outer edge of my right foot. So I've got the arch of the right foot level to the heel of the right hand, and then I'm going to place the left ankle on top of the right ankle. Still, I'm catching my balance here with the fingertips to the floor. The most common thing that happens here is the hips drop. So we're lifting our hips up and then slowly, carefully bringing the left hand up and onto the hip. So the right big toe base projecting towards the floor helps the hips to lift. But just feel it for yourself. There's a little bit of instability in the right hand, but also in the right foot. So the more active we keep the right foot and the top foot, the more we project out through the four corners of the feet, the more stillness comes to the body overall. And then we can extend the top arm up, and we slowly turn the head, and we're looking up towards the top thumb, keeping the four corners of the feet open, projecting outwards. And then hands back to the floor. We'll press back to dog pose and bring the left hand into the center of the mat. Right fingertips to the floor. So for me, it's just a little bit off the yoga mat there, and you can easily reach down and just catch the balance there lightly with the fingertips. Left foot, we come onto the outer edge of the left foot, we place the right ankle on top of the left ankle, and then just gently bringing the right hand off the floor onto the hip. Left big toe base down, hips lift up. We need to make the left shoulder blade stable. So the hand presses down naturally, even pressure with the hand down. Left shoulder blade, move it into the body and firm it. And then top arm take up. Slowly turning the head to look up towards the top thumb. Okay, and then we'll release out of the pose. Let's come all the way down and rest back to Virasana forwards. Now, some of you might have been established with that balance until that last instruction of turning the head and moving the head. So when we're moving the head in a balancing pose, we need to be really conscious and careful of what we're doing. No sudden movements. We'll come back to the head position, but let's head now to Garudasana. We'll do it eventually looking out in towards the center of the room, but let's start initially facing the wall, close enough to the wall so that we can, with our fingertips, as we did to the floor a moment ago, just lightly catching our balance if and when we need to. We're going to focus on the legs. When we actually get to balancing, we'll just be bringing our hands onto the hips. Of course, this is the arm action. We'll get there eventually, but initially just working with the legs. Now, the first thing that we need to establish is that the center line in a yoga pose is often a really good reference point when we're maintaining our balance. It's not like an abstract concept though, this straight line. We have to accept the fact that we have a physical body that we're working with, and it has imperfections, and the balance often accommodates those imperfections. In terms of the balance in this pose, it's really a one-legged balance. So we partially bend one leg, we wrap the other leg around. I'll exaggerate it. What we want to make sure though is that we're not trying to keep both knees in the center of the pose. So this standing leg knee, it sits more directly over the ankle. You can actually see when I go too far this way, the foot, it rolls to the inside. That's when I lose all of my strength and stability in the ankle region. So with that in mind, so we're going to be balancing first of all on the right foot, toes pointing directly ahead. As we bend the knee, the kneecap, it faces directly ahead. We want to avoid it twisting off towards the big toe side. Then we wrap the left leg over the top of the right leg and hooking the toes in behind the calf. Some people can't do that, and that's fine. See if the toes will tuck. If it does, it gives you a little bit of extra leverage to hold the balance. If not, the foot can just be neatly there behind the calf. A couple of actions that will help here. The top leg needs to press down onto the bottom leg. So the back of the left thigh, it presses onto the front of the right thigh. The knees, they press against one another. The outer knees, they squeeze together. And then those of you that have been able to tuck the left foot, press the back of the foot into the calf, press the calf back into the top of the foot. And then just lightly bringing the hands away from the wall. See if you can catch the balance. From there we can bring our hands onto our hips, or just keep the hands near the wall if you need. Okay, release, change sides. We bend the left leg, wrapping the right leg over the top of the left leg. Watch for the knees pushing towards the right side, keeping the knee joint over the left ankle. So it really is a left-legged pose, this one. We don't want to get too entwined with the legs as if it's a two-legged pose. We're balancing on the left leg, hands away from the wall, hands to the hips. You keep your head still, you keep your eyes still. If you're like me, with a blank white wall directly in front of your face, hard for there to be anything for your eyes to lock onto. It actually makes the balance harder. Let's release up and out, and we'll turn the other way. Ideally, you're in a room environment now where there's more visual information further away from you, some detail that you can lock your gaze onto. That helps to keep your eyes and your head still across the room there, roughly at eye level. Maybe just so that we're clear with it, we'll just stand feet hip width apart. So we'll start initially standing on our right leg. The left leg crosses over the right leg, so then the right arm will cross over the left arm. And let's try both ways. Good if we can just feel the sensation of how the arms work. So the left elbow on top of the right elbow. What we don't want is to be just holding on to the balance and then thinking, now, which arm goes on top, and then we get confused, and that's when the balance comes. So I'll just remind you again, let's be ready, facing out into the center of the room. We'll be standing on the right leg. The left leg will wrap over the right leg. When we go to the arm position, the right elbow will come on top of the left elbow. Be ready. So head still, fixing the gaze there on one point, one detail across the room. And it involves mental concentration, fixing the gaze. Don't let the eyes do the work. It's a real mental quality there. Fixing the gaze, fixing the awareness on that point as we partially bend the right leg, knee facing directly ahead, and then left leg crosses over the top of the right leg, and then right arm crosses over the left arm, looking directly ahead, and release. and come back to Tadasana. Now, really common there that we've got the balance until that point where the arms start to cross in front of the eyes, and then that tends to throw us off balance. Important that your gaze and your focus is out further than the arms. So you do see, of course, the arms. It's not what you're focusing on. They're more of a blurred quality, the arms. It's not that our gaze switches from our point that we're looking at back to the arms. If that happens, that's when we tend to lose our balance. So it's bringing the arms into the pose without disturbing the gaze of the eyes. Bend the left leg, wrap the right leg over the left leg, hooking the toes, and then left elbow on top of the right elbow. Head still, fix the gaze, and release, and come up, and just a moment there in Tadasana. Restabilize the body, lifting the chest, spreading the weight evenly across the four corners of the feet. And let's just remain there in Tadasana for a moment. We're heading now towards the balancing pose of Vrikshasana, again where we'll be balancing on one leg. Before we do though, let's just return to something that is often done right at the beginning of when we're learning yoga, and that is just getting a sense of how we balance in this pose of Tadasana with the eyes shut. So let's just do it now. We'll shut the eyes, and you can feel it, all those subtle adjustments that we make in the soles of the feet, and we're making those adjustments in order to keep our hips more still. Notice that the head also, it moves about. Again, it's not a bit like the hips earlier. It's not forwards, backwards, to the right side, to the left side. It's much more circular, almost spiral-like movements, with those spiral movements either gravitating more towards the center when we're holding our balance, improving our balance, or the radius of those spiral circular movements getting wider if we're starting to feel a little less stable. But if you have the pose can accommodate a little bit of excessive movement of the head, it's far less tolerant of movement of the pelvis. As soon as the pelvis starts to move about, that's when we really start to lose control of the pose. So something that can really help to stabilize the pelvic area. Let's take one of our blocks so the feet can still be quite close together. We're going to hold the block between the inner thighs, the narrow way of gripping the block. Get the block up as high as possible. The block is for the pelvis here. It's not for the knees, not for the thighs. It's for the pelvis. I've actually got the block there. I can feel it lightly touching the base of the pelvis, the perineum region. For me, my feet can almost come together. Just make sure that you're maintaining straight lines with the legs. We don't want the feet to be narrower than the hips here. And the squeezing action of the block. So feel it. The outer thighs, they draw inwards towards the center line. And it creates a nice amount of balance. The block presses back so that the inner thigh resists towards the outer thigh. And those two forces, almost like they balance one another out, and they give a really nice sense of balance when they are even. The block, when we squeeze it, it's not pushing forwards. That classic Tadasana movement, it draws back a little so that the inner thighs stay back. And in balance with that, we keep the tailbone in and down towards the block. Now just feel the nice stability that brings to the whole pose. It really helps the hips to integrate with the legs and the upper body. And if you now shut the eyes again, there's much less of a sense of swaying, much less of a panicky sense in the feet. The feet just have that more calm, spread out quality. The body just sits more still as we observe natural objects, inanimate objects. Think of a bottle, think of a vase, think of a jar balancing on a table, just how still it is. It's not as if it's necessarily trying to make the balance happen. It's a natural quality of its position. So the block really helpful for that. We want to bring that sense to Vrikshasana, and the way we can do it is by using the foot that we bring up to the inner thigh and making sure that the foot and the inner thigh are actively pressing against one another. So we'll be standing on the right leg first of all. Find that point directly opposite there. One detail that you can fix your gaze on, and it will mean that your head will be more still. So reaching down with the left hand and positioning the foot, bringing it high up onto the right inner thigh. We've got the toes pointing down. The foot is where the block has just been, as high as possible there, the heel touching the perineum if possible. Press the inner thigh against the heel against the inner thigh. Make the outer heel press against the standing leg. It brings the buttock in, and there's that nice stability in the pelvis. We'll bring the arms out to the side, turn the palms up, and then raise your arms up. Notice how lifting through to the fingertips, lifting your chest, it helps to improve the balance. Okay, and then release the arms down. We'll try on the left side and just check it for yourself if the instructions are more geared towards the higher parts of the pose, where the hands are, where the arms are, where the center of the chest is, lifting upwards. Those instructions tend to help the balance. If we focus too much on the sole of the foot there, that can often bring the energy down in a less productive way, for these particular types of poses at least. So we want to really bring our attention up towards the fingertips. So it brings a nice light energy to the pose that really assists our balance. Reach down, bring the right foot as high as possible onto the left inner thigh. Inner thigh against the heel, heel against the inner thigh, buttock in. Chest up, arms out to the side, turn the palms up towards the ceiling, and then raise your arms up. Keep the wrists shoulder width. Lift your chest with the arms. Extend up into the fingertips. Okay, and release down. And let's bring the feet back together. We'll do briefly Uttanasana. Now, it's not necessarily a pose that is one that we're likely to topple out of. It is really good though for strengthening the quadriceps. So stronger the legs are, the more of an asset we have there in terms of holding our balance, preventing toppling, preventing falls generally. And also it presents the subtlety of balance. So it's not always that we're catching ourselves to prevent a fall. It might be that we just have that sensibility of knowing when our weight is too much to the ball of the foot, when it needs to come back to the heel, when we need to spread the body weight more evenly across the sole of the foot. So learning yoga, we gain that sensitivity, that sensibility of using the sole of the foot. Otherwise we might just think of it as just one uniform area. The more we do yoga, the more we realize there's that whole world there in the soles of the feet and the toes. So we'll start with the arms out in front, and then eventually we'll be raising the arms up. As we raise the arms up, we'll just notice there the assist to the balance. So initially, our weight is even between the ball of the foot and the heel. As yoga practitioners, that starts to be a little more simple. We can come to that a little more readily. And then we bend the knees, and probably what we find is that the weight shifts more to the ball of the foot. So we need to, without throwing the balance, just guide the weight a little more back into the heels. As I do that, I can feel my sitting bones tuck under, my navel sits back towards the spine. Let's turn the palms so that they face one another, and then raising the arms up. But from the sides of the waist, lift through to the fingertips. Include the sides of the ribs, the sides of the arms, reaching all the way to the fingertips, looking directly ahead. Okay, and then release and come up and bring the arms down by the sides. So, Utthita Hasta Padangustasana, make sure that you've got enough room out to the side for your leg to swing out to the side if we need. We'll start in Tadasana. I'm going to keep the points here quite simple, not too many of them, and that's another thing that can really help with our balance. Knowing that the balance is such an intuitive process. It's not so much something that we can control mentally. So good to have a few key points, and we'll try to give some really helpful ones, but we don't want too many of them. We're going to focus on keeping the chest lifting open and the head still and the gaze fixed. So really key points when we're working with our balance. We'll be initially balancing on the left leg. I'm going to use a belt today. Some of you might be able to hold the big toe. more important today that we're working on our balance. Another time we can come back and improve hamstring flexibility, improve our technique. Lots of technique that we can work with in this pose in terms of hip alignment, overall alignment. But today we're really just focused on being still and balanced. Standing on the left foot, we'll bend the right leg. We reach down with the belt, placing the loop of the belt under the ball of the foot. We're holding the belt with just the one hand. Bring your left hand onto the hip. I'm giving you time to find this position. Don't rush there. The arm is to the inside of the right leg. Now we're not waiting until we straighten the leg to hold the balance. Let's find it here. So chest lifting. Resist with the foot, but pull up with the belt so that the chest lifts. Head still, maintaining that lift in the chest. Begin to straighten the right leg. Head still, fix the gaze, keep the chest lifting. Head still, fix the gaze, and release down. And we'll change sides. Now I could feel there as I was talking through my pose, the most difficult part of that pose was actually reaching down and hooking the feet. And that's probably the bit that I was doing with less awareness. So let's bend the left leg up. And something that's helping me is if I just support the left foot with my left hand as I position the belt. Then I can transfer the belt into the left hand, and that's a much improved way of getting that belt in position. And I don't feel that I now have to recover my chest. It's already in a much more open position. So resist with the foot, pull up with the belt so that the chest lifts. And just think of protecting that chest lift as we then start to straighten the left leg. Pulling against the foot to lift the chest up. Head still, fix the gaze, and then bend the knee and release down. So maybe before we do the variation out to the side, good to just come back to Uttanasana briefly. And it is a pose where there is a really nice symmetry. The body makes a really nice vertical line. It's because the limbs are symmetrical, literally, with one another. The right side the same as the left side. As soon as we though start to bring one leg out to the side, the legs are heavy part of the body. Of course, the body, it needs to lean a little bit off the vertical. So don't feel as if you need to be stuck with some mental concept of keeping the body vertical. There does need to be this give in order to let the body come a little bit out to the side in order to counterbalance the leg. However, it's not that we think that movement. We just listen to the body, intuitively respond, and let the body, it knows itself how far the body needs to lean. So in a sense, we're not getting in the way of the balance here. So good that we get that really clear that the balance is and will remain an intuitive concept, something that we can have some really clear ideas around to help, but something that with practice, that sense of intuition just gets better and better and more refined. So we're going to be passing through that position where we've just been, bringing the leg initially out to the front. Again, I'll just support the foot with the right hand, transfer the belt into the right hand, then chest lift. We'll bring the leg forwards, just keeping the head still, the eyes still as the leg swings out to the side. Keep the chest lifting up as the leg comes out to the side. And then back to the front and release, and we'll change sides. The expectation here is that you will be experimenting with your balance, and good if you are losing the balance. I mean, ideally you will be, over time, finding that you'll be losing the balance less, but better to actually be playing and learning with the balance rather than having some predetermined idea that you have to not fall out of the pose. So in terms of learning, good if you are exploring. Place the belt in position, chest lift up, leg starts out in front, and then keeping that lift in the chest as the leg comes out to the side. Chest lift up, head still, and then bringing the leg back to the front and bending the knee and releasing down. Belt off to the side. We'll go Trikonasana. Now the wall's here, but we won't be using it with the heel. Often having the heel to the wall will assist with your balance. So we want to just give ourselves a little bit more of a challenge in terms of balancing today. Wide distance between the feet. Arms extend out to the side. We'll come down to the pose. Let's begin with the left hand onto the hip. Now you've got the right hand, I'm working to the floor. It might be for you on the ankle, it might be up nearer to the shin. Of course, we need that right hip in, we need the left shoulder back. They're the basic points of alignment. Now, in Trikonasana, it is a pose where we are leaning back a little, and just generally, not when we're emphasizing balance in our asana, but just generally, it's quite nice if we get almost to the point of toppling back, because just prior to that point of falling, there is a nice light quality to the body, and ideally we want to retain that throughout the whole stay in Trikonasana. So we want that quality. Top shoulder back, the right hip in. Let's start looking down, and just to bring the balance a little more directly into the pose, let's shut the eyes today. And I mentioned it before, but often when we're turning the head, that's when we encounter some problems with the balance. So let's just find some stability. We've shut the eyes, and normally the eyes really help with the balance. Once they're shut, we can't rely on that aid. We've got to work elsewhere. So let's go for 3 areas. The left heel pressing down, the right hip contained in, and the right shoulder blade moving in. So I'm stabilizing 3 areas that I know are quite prone to instability. Left heel pressed down, right hip in, right shoulder blade firm. And now no sudden movements of the head. Just slowly turning the head to look up. Keeping the left heel down, keeping the right hip in, keeping the right shoulder blade in. And then the top arm take up, and then I can just open my eyes at the end there and looking up towards the top thumb. As soon as I open the eyes, then straight away the balance gets that little bit more easy. Release and come up, and we'll change sides. And coming to the pose, right hand onto the hip. We're looking down, and as soon as we now shut the eyes, a little more complex in terms of the balance. Those 3 go-to areas: right heel firm, left hip move in, left shoulder blade move in. Those 3 areas, balancing their stability, their firmness, keeping a mental grip of each of those areas as you slowly start to turn the head, looking up, top arm take up, and now open the eyes. Right heel press down, left hip contain, move in, left shoulder blade contain, move in, and inhale and come all the way up. We'll go Ardha Chandrasana. Now, I'll be working a little bit like I was earlier in Vashisthasana, just catching the balance with the fingertips to the floor. It's a firmer contact, of course, here with Ardha Chandrasana, but I'll be working fingertips to the floor. Now, really common to use blocks in this pose, and we get proficient at learning how to balance with the hand holding the block this way, maybe the heel of the hand down, more of a flat hand, and just so that you can get that sense of being able to work with the fingertips, and it will help your balance. You can either have the block flat, if you need just a little bit of height. If you need more height, you could always go the second block, it just almost like elevating the floor up to meet your hand. If you do definitely need that full block, many people will, then you've got a moment just to get your belt and tighten it around both blocks, and then you've got a nice firm, taller block that you can get all of your fingertips onto. Something that we see a lot in classes is people like this with their fist down onto the block. It's, I guess, has a degree of stability, particularly if you arthritic for some people in the hands or the wrists, it can bypass that, but it doesn't tend to lead anywhere. It might just be a solution to this particular pose. It's not going to lead on to some of the more advanced balancing poses. So good if we get that sensitivity of the hand. I'll be working with hand to the floor. If you need the blocks, have them there. We'll begin in Trikonasana. We'll start this time with the left heel to the wall, right foot step out. And let's come Trikonasana, top hand to the hip. We partially bend the right leg. We hop in closer with the left foot towards the right foot, then we place the hand down. I've got the fingertips to the floor and then coming up to Ardha Chandrasana. We start off looking down. We've got the top hand onto the hip, something that helps with the balance. The top leg keeping it still, active but still. The other thing that's really helpful is the eyes, focusing and looking down at one spot on the floor. However, now we're going to move the head, so that's not going to help us so much. We need to let the focus, we need to let go of the eye focus, and we'll replace it with that sensation of the hand being there to the floor or the block. So it's not that the pressure on that hand needs to get firmer, but equally it shouldn't get lighter as we slowly start to turn the head. Focus on what the right hand feels. Nice even pressure with the right hand as we slowly start to turn the head and look up towards the ceiling. And then the top arm take up. Top hand back to the hip, turn the head to look back down to the floor, and then we'll bring the left toes down. We slide the right hand back beside the foot. It gives us the control to bring the heel back to the wall. We come Trikonasana, and from there all the way up. Okay, and so more important today, trying that head position. And if we had a room of 20 people, quite likely that as soon as the head starts to move, the majority of people will fall out of the pose, and that's not a problem. So it's good if we're just working with that, and that gives us something to improve upon. If we just never attempt to look up, that's when the pose starts to plateau. A year, 2 years, 3 years can go by and nothing will change. This way of working, you can find improvement there in a matter of lessons even, days or particularly weeks. Okay, Trikonasana. Right hand to the hip, partially bend the left leg. Good at this point if you've got the left hand to the floor and not blocks. So if you will be using blocks, you've got them there for once we've hopped the feet closer together. Let's go there now. We bring the right foot closer to the left foot. Now you can use the blocks if you've got them there. Or as I'm doing, hand to the floor, feeling the weight of the body there with the fingertips as we transfer weight into the left hand. And then raise the right leg up. Make the right leg active but still. The kneecap firm. Think of Vashisthasana earlier, projecting out through the four corners of the feet. Think of Tadasana, extending out through the four corners of the feet. Now some of you might have felt that the neck was quite blocked in its movement. Make sure that the right shoulder is lifting. And then focus on the fingertips. Nice, even, continual distribution of weight there as the head starts to turn and look up towards the ceiling. And then the top arm take up, top hand back to the hip, and release down and bring the heel back to the wall. Trikonasana. And come then all the way up. Virabhadrasana 1. We'll again work with the back heel away from the wall. Equally, we could have the mat here completely away from the wall. The wall won't be necessary for this pose. Try to keep your back heel down today. I'm aware that that makes then the hips a little harder to turn. Sometimes I give that instruction of the back heel lifting in order to turn the hips, only because that's so therapeutic for the back. Important that the heel is down today because we're going to be lifting our head to look up towards the ceiling above. Now that last point in Ardha Chandrasana, making sure that the shoulder was contributing to the turning of the head and not blocking it. Similar with this pose, when we look up, we want to make sure that the head's not doing something different from the chest. So the chest is lifting, and then the head can, with the chest, lift and look up towards the ceiling. It makes it comfortable for the neck. It just gives a nice overall balance quality to the whole pose. Be ready there. So start hands on the hips, and we'll bend the front leg. And then let's bring the arms up. Let's have them together today. The palms together, elbows straight. The thumbs are crossed over to help keep the elbows straight. We're pointing the arms directly up, and then we're looking up with the chest. And you'll probably feel some fluctuation there in the back foot, from the ball of the foot to the heel, maybe in that front foot from the inner to the outer foot. And we're just intuitively holding the balance there. But something that we can keep really still and stable. That extension of the arms straight up with the elbows straight, and the gaze of the hands up towards the ceiling above there, keeping the gaze fixed. Okay, and then release and come up, and we'll change. Left leg back. Now let's this time extend the arms up first of all, and that way we can just check it. Maybe out in front first of all. So we're bringing the hands together, namaskar, prayer-like position. Eventually the thumbs don't need to be crossed. Tighter shoulders and upper back. Helpful if the elbows are initially, if the thumbs are crossed. It just gives us that better leverage into the elbow region. Then raise the arms up. Already get a sense of the direction of the arms without needing to look up there. The elbows straight, pointing up through all of the fingers directly up towards the ceiling. Notice how directing your attention up into the fingertips, it really helps with the balance. Bend the front leg. And we're going to move the head, so just be ready for that. No sudden movements of the head. Make sure the chest is lifting with the chin as you now look up towards the ceiling above. Elbows straight, stability in the arms, stability in the eyes, looking directly up. Okay, and then release and come all the way up. And let's do one more pose, standing pose, Virabhadrasana 3. And of course the arms in this pose, they come forwards. However, having the arms out to the side, but like a tightrope walker, it can help you with your balance. And it's a good starting point for working in the pose because it can give you a good sense of what the back half of the body does. Often we're so fixated with where the eyes are looking, where the arms are pointing, the forward movement, that we totally neglect the back half of the pose. The back leg is the real anchor in the pose. The more it lifts and extends back, we've got something to anchor us as we then project forwards with the gaze, with the spine and with the arms. So if we start with our arms Vimanasana out to the side like an aeroplane, then we can get a clear sense of the back leg. Let's try it first of all. Now another day we'll come back and really deeply connect Virabhadrasana 3 with Virabhadrasana 1. Today we really just want to get to the pose. We're going to, for that reason, more quickly get to the pose, we're going to have a shorter stance. So not the classical way of coming to the pose. We'd normally come through Virabhadrasana 1. Today, just to get there a little more quickly, more readily, we've got, let's say, a 2/3 distance stance there. Enough room behind you for the back leg to extend. And the arms out to the side and the palms facing down. And we just partially bend the right leg. We transfer our weight forwards. For the moment, the left toes are to the floor. And then we come to the pose. Now we can lift our back leg, keeping the knees straight, and the chest can descend. We're looking directly ahead. Okay, and then release back down. And change sides. So I can just give you a bit of a taste of the pose, particularly a taste of that back half of the pose, the way the back leg works. We're trying to extend it as much as possible back towards the wall behind. It's an anchor for them being able to go forwards in a moment when we do it with our arms extending forwards. 2/3 stance, it's a short stance. Arms out to the side as we bend the front leg. We're drawing the left outer hip back. And then bringing the chest forwards, leading with the chest, it comes forwards. Now the more the back leg lifts, the more the chest can come down. But extend back through to the four corners of the right foot. Looking forwards, but projecting the leg back and away from where you're looking. Okay, and release down. So we've got that really clear, that sensation of the back leg in the body. So now we can focus a little more on the arms. We've just done it in Virabhadrasana 1, keeping the elbows straight. You can work with the hands apart. Today, just to bring that real sharpness to the arms, We're going to keep the elbows straight, pointing directly out through the fingers. I'll have my thumbs crossed. Eventually we just keep the palms together without crossing the thumbs. Today, just gives that extra bit of lock to the elbows. It will help with our balance. Right foot forwards, short stance, maybe 2/3 of what you would normally have. Arms extend up, hands together, elbows straight. Now choose one point there on the wall opposite. See if that point can be just a little bit down from your eye level. Try to choose the eye level of where your head will be when you're fully in the pose. Partially bend the right leg. Draw the right outer hip back. Come forwards, leading with the chest. And then up into the pose. Extend the back leg, your gaze, and your fingers pointing directly ahead. Chest comes down without the elbows dropping. Okay, and then release down. And last side. So now that we've established this clarity of balance, we can then build it back in with that more classical way of coming into the pose via Virabhadrasana 1. Today we're just taking a bit of a shortcut to get there, knowing that we're so focused on the balance today. Arms extend up, partial bend of the left leg, left outer hip back. As we come forwards, we're lengthening the chest out and away from the pelvis. Chest comes down, the elbows stay lifting up, and then coming to the pose. Chest down without the elbows dropping. Fingers and the eyes at the same point. Okay, and then release all the way down. Let's come down to sitting. So Ubhaya Padangusthasana, and common to lose balance back. Make sure the wall's not too close there. You may topple back. Good here if you don't put a blanket under your sitting bones. Some poses we might need to, particularly some people have quite a sensitive tailbone area. Blanket here can really make the floor hard to feel, make the balance a lot less clear. I'm going to be working by holding my big toes. If you can't reach your big toes, maybe we'll test that. So you test that just by doing this, straightening your knees, reaching forwards. And if you're unable to hold your big toes without rounding the back ribs and collapsing the chest, then you'll have your belt that will be coming around like this, around the balls of the feet. Important that you can resist with the feet, but pull firmly with the hands or the belt against the feet in order to lift your chest up. And here, the sacrum, in and up the chest, forwards and up. So, arms come in between the legs, we catch hold of the big toes, and we just rock back, letting the heels come a little bit off the pose. Now, the main enemy of the balance is the collapsing sacrum. So, we can move it in and lift the chest up. A little bit we can do that without using the arms, but way more effective if we resist with the toes, but pull the fingers against the toes so that we get that lift in the chest. Once we've got the chest lift, we then just maintain it, very similar to Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana. Keeping that lift in the chest, keeping that pressure of the fingers pulling against the toes, we start to straighten the legs. And we're not looking directly ahead here, we're looking up over the top of the big toes. Keep resisting with the toes, pull against the toes with the fingers, lift the chest without your shoulders shrugging. Sacrum lifting, sternum lifting. Okay, and then release back down. So we're balancing in that region of the body between the sitting bones and the tailbone. Paripurna Navasana, that pose we're balancing and using the arm strength to a degree. Paripurna Navasana, we're using the abdominal strength. And we're not connecting literally the feet and the hands. Let's try it. So we'll work two ways. First way, just keeping the hands back. Second way, applying more balance, and eventually the arms, as they would normally do, coming parallel to the floor, extending out in front. So fingertips to the floor behind, we lean back so that the feet come off the floor, similar to the previous pose, without dropping the sacrum, without dropping the sternum. And then raise the legs up. We're lifting the toes higher than the top of the head, keeping the knees straight. It's roughly 60-degree angle, very roughly, the legs. Okay, and then release the feet down. We'll just come to simple cross leg for a moment. If you're tighter in the hips, you can just have your hands there beside you just to support the lower back. Good if you can just let the quadriceps relax. If the quadriceps are cramping, it may be an indicator that the angle of the legs is too low. Better to then stay with that first variation, leaning back more into the hands, seeing if you can get the legs to elevate more, and that can often help to take away that cramping feeling in the quadriceps. All right, we'll just work with one more attempt now at Paripurnanavasana. It's the full balancing position where the arms are brought out parallel to the floor. Let's try it. So feet together, knees together, hands back, leaning back, legs straight. Walk the hands forwards, sacrum in, sternum up, and then bringing the arms into the balance. Project out through the four corners of the feet. Keep the head still, keep the eyes still. Good, and then release. Back to simple cross legs. We'll just walk the hands forwards for a moment just to release the back, let the breath settle a little. Walk the hands back in, change the cross leg over. Walk the hands back out again. All right, we're ready for Shavasana now. Let's take the blanket. Let's try to use really minimal supports today, and some minimal extra supports. We've got the blanket, of course, for the head, but let's maximize the use of the floor as a yoga prop. So, if you need anything to keep yourself warm, of course, in doing that. So, just coming to our natural Shavasana now. A lot of these balancing poses are really helpful if we're spreading our body weight as evenly as possible across the floor. Now, it might not necessarily be a pose that you associate with balance, but of course there is that natural level that the body tends to find in terms of balance, and often we're a little more rotated to one side or the other side. You can feel the footprint of the body on the floor. It might be heavier to the right side or the left side. It might switch from the pelvis to the shoulders. There might be a bit of a twisting in the spine. There might be that the head feels a little more pulled over to the right or the left side. So let's today just consciously make our pose a little wider. We'll bring the feet out a bit wider than we would normally have them. Ordinarily they're a bit wider than hip width. We'll go even further than that today. The body flesh, commonly we tuck it under and away from the spine, but let's today really do that, but in addition to that, maximize the spreading of the body flesh in an outward direction. Now before we get too arranged with the arms, let's just hug the front of the body. So we wrap the arms around the front, hooking the fingers in behind the backs of the shoulders. Feel how that spreads the shoulder blades out and away from one another, away from the spine, without the shoulder blades jamming back in towards the spine. Then let's just bring the arms further out to the side. So maybe not quite to shoulder height, but roughly there. So that we have more space across the back of the pelvis, more space across the shoulder blade region. Arms are wider, the legs are wider. And just feel we're even more earth to the ground here, more stable. And it might be that you just feel a little more symmetrical in your pose, more evenly spread out from right side to left side. Might be a little bit less inclined for the head to be twisting either to the left or the right. Feel the contact of the back of the skull releasing down and into the floor. So those bits of the body in contact with the floor, they feel a little more consciously spread out, broader. So the arms have a nice length. When we breathe in, the arms retain that length. It's also in the face as well. So as we relax further into the pose, the mouth is not squashed towards the center line of the face, the corners of the mouth release and spread out to the sides. There's that feeling of more space through the bridge of the nose. The eyes themselves, from the tear duct corner to the outer corner, the eyes, as we relax more, there is that sense of width, of increasing width there. More space between the eyebrows. The temples relax, and it even allows the eyebrows to feel as if they finish the eyebrow line more towards the sides of the head. Forehead skin as well, releasing from the center towards the sides. Feel the contact of the back of the skull releases down, but the skin there of the scalp, it spreads to enable the skull to release down. The breath movement as well. We breathe in and the side ribs broaden. This broadening quality really fundamental to the balance, to the stability, to the deepening release that can come to Shavasana. Eyes themselves, they sink back into the skull, but they feel just that little bit wider as they sink back into the body. Okay, and then let's take a couple of slightly deeper in-breaths. And then bend your knees. Bring your hands across your chest or your abdomen. Eyes open. And roll to the side. Thank you for practicing with Yoga Selection.